The day 12-year-old Emily Harrison stopped reaching for the sunlight, the entire Harrison mansion seemed to dim with her. She sat by the tall window every morning, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead as if the world had turned into nothing but darkness. Doctors had confirmed it. Reports were signed. Tests were done. Emily Harrison was blind, or so everyone believed. Everyone except the one person no one ever listened to. Her father, Jonathan Harrison, was a self-made millionaire whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and fear in negotiations. He had conquered markets, crushed competitors, and built an empire from nothing. But none of that power mattered when his wife died in a car accident 3 years earlier, and his daughter slowly retreated into silence afterward. When Emily began bumping into furniture, flinching at light, and refusing to read, Jonathan threw money at the problem like he always did. The best specialists, the most expensive hospitals, the most advanced equipment, and finally the verdict he dreaded, trauma-induced blindness. Jonathan believed it without question, because believing was easier than hopping. Emily stopped going to school, tutors came and went. Her world shrank to familiar footsteps, soft voices, and memorized paths. Jonathan loved her fiercely, but his love was heavy, wrapped in guilt and fear. He spoke to her carefully, as if she were fragile glass, and unknowingly taught her that she was broken. Slowly, Emily began to believe it too. Then Grace Miller arrived. Grace was hired as a live-in maid, quiet, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a soft voice that didn't tremble around the Harrisons' wealth. She had lost her own husband years ago and raised a son on cleaning jobs and prayers. To Jonathan, she was efficient and invisible. To Emily, she was warmth. Grace noticed things others didn't. She noticed how Emily turned her head when sunlight shifted across the room, how her fingers paused just a second too late before hitting the wall, how her eyes, supposedly sightless, followed sounds with uncanny accuracy. One afternoon, Grace accidentally dropped a glass, and Emily flinched before it shattered. Grace froze. Blind children didn't flinch like that. Over the following weeks, Grace paid closer attention. She would change the placement of small objects without telling Emily. A chair moved slightly, a book placed where it hadn't been before. Each time, Emily hesitated, then navigated around them perfectly. Once, Grace held up 3 fingers without a word. Emily's eyes flickered and she smiled. That smile broke Grace's heart. One evening, while brushing Emily's hair, Grace spoke gently. "Emily, sweetheart, can you see me?" Emily's body stiffened. Her smile vanished. "My daddy says I can't," Emily whispered, "and the doctor said so too." Grace swallowed hard. "But what do you say?" Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks. "I see a little, enough to know when people are sad, enough to know Daddy looks tired all the time." The truth spilled out between sobs. After her mother's death, Emily had gone through weeks of blurry vision and headaches. Doctors rushed tests. Jonathan panicked. When Emily heard the word blind, something inside her snapped. She was scared, terrified of more hospitals, more pain, more disappointment. When she realized everyone expected her not to see, she stopped trying. And when she stopped trying, her world truly began to fade. Grace held her tightly, anger and compassion twisting in her chest. Telling Jonathan wouldn't be easy. When Grace finally asked to speak with him, Jonathan barely looked up from his tablet. "Is Emily okay?" "She's stronger than you think," Grace said carefully, "but there's something you need to know." Jonathan listened, at first politely, then impatiently, then angrily. "Are you saying every doctor was wrong?" he snapped. "Do you know how much I've spent trying to help my daughter?" Grace didn't flinch. "Money can't see what love overlooks," she said softly. Jonathan stood up, furious. "You're dismissed for the evening." But that night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He remembered moments he had brushed aside. Emily's perfect memory of rooms she'd supposedly never seen. The way she once described a sunset by name. Doubt crept in like a thief. The next morning, Jonathan followed Emily quietly as Grace guided her into the garden. Grace stopped suddenly. "Emily," she said, "what color are the roses?" Emily hesitated, then whispered red and some white. Jonathan's breath caught painfully in his chest. The truth hit him harder than any business loss ever had. Doctors were called again, this time with patience, not panic. New tests revealed the reality Emily had lived with in silence. Her blindness had never been complete. It was psychological, rooted in trauma and reinforced by fear. With therapy, encouragement, and time, her vision could improve. Jonathan broke down in the hospital hallway. "I failed her," he sobbed to Grace. "I thought protecting her meant believing she was broken." Grace shook her head gently. "You loved her the best way you knew how. Now love her the way she needs." The journey back wasn't easy. Emily struggled with guilt for lying. Jonathan struggled with shame for not seeing sooner. Therapy sessions were filled with tears, setbacks, and small victories. Emily learned to trust her eyes again. Jonathan learned to trust his daughter. One afternoon, months later, Emily stood in the same window where she once stared into darkness. Sunlight flooded the room. She turned, smiling brightly. "Daddy," she said, "look, I can see you." Jonathan knelt and held her, crying openly, unashamed. Grace watched quietly from the doorway, her work done. Jonathan offered her a bonus, a raise, even a new house. Grace accepted only one thing, a promise. "Listen," she said, "even when the truth comes from someone small." Jonathan kept that promise. Emily returned to school. She learned to read again, slowly but proudly. The mansion felt alive once more, and Grace remained, not as a maid but as family. Because sometimes, the greatest blindness isn't in the eyes. It's in the heart, until someone brave enough helps you see.